Solomon's heart pounded in his chest with every step they took, the tension in the air growing thicker as they approached the shrine. When they arrived, the shrine stood like an ancient relic, made of mud and palm fronds. Smoke curled from a small fire outside, and the air was heavy with the smell of herbs and incense. Nokidi, the native doctor, sat cross-legged near the entrance, his face hidden beneath a red cap. As Solomon and Sam stepped closer, Nokidi lifted his head, his eyes piercing and knowing. His voice was calm but commanding. "Young man," he said, looking directly at Solomon, "I know why you've come." Solomon froze, surprised. He hadn't even spoken yet, but the native doctor seemed to already know everything. How do you know?" Solomon stammered. Nokidi chuckled softly, his eyes never leaving Solomon's face. "I see many things. Spirits speak to me, and they have told me of your troubles." Solomon swallowed hard, his heart pounding. "I had a dream, my family came to me. They pointed at my uncle, Chief Badmus. They said he's responsible for their deaths. I don't know if it's true, but I need to know." Nokidi's expression grew serious. Dreams are powerful, and they often reveal truths that are needed to be kept hidden from our waking minds. But be careful, young man. The path you are on is a dangerous one. If I were you, I'd not do what you are about to do. Solomon and Sam left the shrine in silence, the weight of the native doctor's warning hanging heavily over them. The air felt thick with tension as they walked back through the forest path, the words of Nokidi replaying in Solomon's mind. Vengeance in this case is a dangerous path. But how could he just sit back and let Chief Badmus get away with killing his family? As they neared the village, Sam broke the silence. "Solomon, you heard the man, but we can't just let this go." Solomon sighed, still unsure. He said vengeance would consume me. What if I end up losing more? Sam shook his head firmly. "And what if you do nothing? Your mother, your sister, they deserve justice. Chief Badmus won't stop until you're gone too. You've seen what he's capable of. You need to act before it's too late." Solomon stopped walking, turning to face his friend. "But how? What am I supposed to do?" "He's untouchable, Sam." Sam looked around cautiously before leaning closer. "No man is untouchable. I know a group of guys, assassins. They could handle him. They are not afraid of anyone. If you want justice for your family, this is how you do it." Solomon hesitated. The idea of hiring killers felt wrong, but the pain of his losses burned inside him. He clenched his fist. "Are you sure they can do it? Badmus is powerful. He might be using something beyond this world." Sam smirked. "That's why you need professionals. They know how to deal with anyone, even a man like Chief Badmus." The next day, Solomon met with the group Sam had mentioned. For men, all seasoned criminals with hardened faces and ruthless eyes. They sat across from him in a dimly lit bar, their expressions serious as they listened to his request. "You want the chief dead?" the leader of the gang, a tall man with a deep scar running down his cheek, asked. Solomon nodded. "Yes, and I want it done as soon as possible. No mistakes." The leader grinned, revealing a row of gold teeth. "For the right price, we don't make mistakes." Solomon slid an envelope full of cash across the table. "Here's half. You'll get the rest after it's done." The man glanced at the money and then back at Solomon. "Consider it done." A few nights later, Chief Badmus was returning home from a late-night meeting, his black SUV gliding down the deserted village road. His driver hummed softly to himself, unaware of the danger lurking ahead. The air was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves. Hidden in the shadows, the four assassins crouched behind a cluster of trees, their guns loaded and ready. They watched as the SUV approached, their fingers steady on the triggers. Now, the leader whispered, and the men stepped out onto the road, blocking the path. The driver slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching to a halt. Without hesitation, the assassins opened fire, bullets flying through the night, aimed directly at Chief Badmus's window. But something strange happened. The bullets, which should have shattered the glass and pierced the chief's body, stopped midair as if hitting an invisible wall. The assassins froze, staring in disbelief as the bullets simply dropped to the ground. "What the hell?" one of them muttered. Chief Badmus, sitting calmly in the back seat, smiled faintly. He opened the car door and stepped out, his regal agbada flowing in the cool night breeze. His eyes scanned the assassins with a look of disdain. "You fools," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Did you really think you could kill me?" Panic set in among the assassins, but before any of them could react, Chief Badmus raised his hand and pointed at the first man. The assassin gasped, clutching his chest, and fell to the ground, lifeless. The second man raised his gun to fire again, but Badmus pointed at him too. He dropped instantly, his body hitting the ground with a dull thud. Fear gripped the remaining two men as they backed away, their guns useless against the dark force protecting the chief. Chief Badmus turned his gaze to the third assassin, who screamed as he too collapsed, dead. The leader of the gang, the scarred man, was the only one left. Trembling, he took a step back, his face pale with terror. Badmus walked slowly toward him, his eyes gleaming with a terrifying power. He grabbed the man by the collar, lifting him off the ground effortlessly. The scarred man struggled, gasping for breath, but Chief Badmus's grip was like iron. "Who sent you?" Badmus asked, his voice dripping with malice. The man's eyes darted around in desperation, but when he looked into Chief Badmus's eyes, something strange happened. In the reflection of Badmus's dark, merciless gaze, he saw Solomon. The image was clear, Solomon, standing in his room, shaking with fear. Chief Badmus smirked, his lips curling into a cruel smile. He shook his head slowly, as if disappointed. "I see him. So, it was you, Solomon. You've made a grave mistake." Chief Badmus dropped the lifeless body of the last assassin without so much as a second glance. As he walked calmly back to his car, his mind was already calculating his next move. "This boy," he muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "He has no idea who he's messing with. I'll teach him a lesson he'll never forget." He climbed back into his car, his driver trembling as he started the engine. Badmus's face remained calm, but inside, a storm brewed. He had been generous with Solomon's family once, but now, he would unleash the full force of his wrath. Meanwhile, Solomon sat in his small room, waiting anxiously for news from the gang. It had been hours since the men left to take down Chief Badmus, but there had been no word. He paced around his room, his heart pounding with anxiety. "Why haven't they called?" he whispered to himself. His mind raced with possibilities. Had they succeeded? Or had something gone wrong? Sam, his closest friend, had assured him that these men were professionals. They had never failed a job. But as the night stretched on, a growing sense of dread gnawed at Solomon's insides. Unable to calm himself, he eventually lay down on his bed, hoping sleep would offer him some reprieve from his restless thoughts. But when sleep finally came, it brought with it a nightmare more terrifying than any reality. In the dream, Solomon found himself in a dark, silent village. The air was thick with fog, and the only sound was the distant beating of drums. His feet carried him forward without his control, leading him deeper into the heart of the strange place. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed behind him. He turned, and his heart nearly stopped. A towering masquerade figure was chasing after him, its body covered in tattered robes and holding 3 long, thorny canes that dripped with fresh blood. Solomon's instincts kicked in, and he ran as fast as he could, his feet pounding against the ground. But no matter how fast he ran, the masquerade was always just behind him, the sound of its cane swishing through the air sending chills down his spine. Run, the wind seemed to whisper, and run he did. But every corner he turned, every alley he ducked into, the masquerade was always there, relentless and terrifying. Finally, he found a small hut and hid inside, his breath ragged, heart pounding in his chest. He peeked out from behind a crack in the door, praying the masquerade wouldn't find him. Minutes passed. He could hear the creature's footsteps outside, searching for him. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps faded. Solomon exhaled in relief, thinking it was over. But when he turned around, the hut's walls, revealing the face of the masquerade standing right in front of him. And as he stared in horror, the masquerade slowly pulled off its mask. Beneath it was not an unknown spirit, but Chief Badmus, his face twisted into a wicked grin. "We are just getting started and you are already this scared." Badmus's voice boomed through the dream. Solomon jolted awake, drenched in sweat, his heart racing as if it would burst out of his chest. The darkness of his room felt suffocating, and for a moment, he could still hear the distant swish of those thorny canes. He sat up, gasping for breath. The dream had felt so real, too real. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, trying to shake off the image of Chief Badmus as the masquerade. But something told him it wasn't just a dream. It was a warning. The next morning, still haunted by the dream, Solomon decided to seek out Sam. He needed to talk to his friend, to figure out what their next move should be. As he walked through the village, the sun barely rising, an eerie quietness filled the air. When he arrived at Sam's house, something felt wrong. The front door was slightly ajar, and there was no sign of movement inside. "Sam!" Solomon called out as he stepped cautiously into the house. There was no response. The house was unnervingly silent. Solomon's heartbeat quickened as he moved further inside. Suddenly, his foot hit something soft. He looked down, and his heart stopped. Lying on the floor in a pool of his own blood was Sam. His eyes were wide open, frozen in a look of shock and terror, and his body was cold and lifeless. His body was filled with marks, cane marks that seemed the same from the one that Chief Badmus used to chase Solomon in the dream. Solomon staggered back, his mind reeling with horror. "No, no, no, no," he whispered, dropping to his knees beside his friend's body. Tears welled up in his eyes as he shook Sam's shoulder, hoping, praying for a response. But his friend was gone. As he knelt there, his tears mixing with the blood on the floor, Solomon noticed something beside Sam's body. Alas, it was the same mask he had seen in his dream. Solomon was immediately filled with fear and horror. What had he done? He exclaimed to himself as he cried uncontrollably, remembering the warning from the native doctor. Soon the villagers/passerby began trooping in, all feeling sorry for poor Solomon. It was perceived amongst the people that Sam was dealt with by the gods because of the scars and mask found on him, so he was buried immediately without being mourned by his family/friends. But Solomon, on his part, knowing what really went wrong, was filled with guilt and hatred for his uncle. The only thought that was on his mind was to get revenge. But still he was lost on how to carry that out. Now he knew. Now he knew what sort of man his uncle Chief Badmus was. Getting revenge was going to be far harder than he thought. And if he doesn't soon, he was sure to be the next. He was filled with so much pain that he found himself wandering towards the grave of his lost family. He laid on the grave crying and cursing. "Why did you leave me? Why did you all leave me to suffer in this cruel world? Take me now, please take me. I cannot fight the battle ahead of me. Take me now," Solomon cried. On seeing that this would not yield out any result, as he had been crying for hours now, he slowly stood up and headed home sober. On getting home, he sank into his bed and was soon fast asleep. Once again he had yet another nightmare. He found himself standing in a strange but familiar arena. It was the same arena from his last dream. He turned, and just as expected, the same masquerade figure was chasing after him, and he ran as fast as he could, his feet pounding against the ground. But no matter how fast he ran, the masquerade was always just behind him, the sound of its cane swishing. But this time something was different. He saw faint figures ahead of him, and as he ran towards them they became more visible. He ran as fast as he could, and soon he was close that he recognized them immediately. His sister Ella, his mother Judith, and also his father stood in front of him. He was so relieved to have them there, and for a moment he forgot all about the masquerade behind him. He looked up to them, but something was different. They all had long thorny canes. Just as the masquerade edged closer, they instantly began to whip him. He let out a relentless cry, its voice ringing a familiar tone, but this time without pride. It was the voice of his uncle, Chief Badmus. Solomon jolted awake, drenched in sweat. Solomon laid on his bed, his heart pounding in his chest. He had barely slept, the sound of canes whipping and the agonized cries of Chief Badmus echoing in his ears. He wanted to believe it was all a dream, but when he opened his eyes and saw the 3 canes standing upright in the middle of his room, covered in blood, he knew something terrible had happened. "What is this?" he whispered, his voice trembling as he stared at the blood-stained canes. His whole body felt weak, his legs barely able to support him as he stood up from the bed. He stumbled toward the canes, but fear held him back. His eyes widened in horror at the sight, his mind racing with questions. Was it real? Did those sounds he heard actually happen? And if they did, what did it mean? Solomon quickly scanned the room, his eyes darting from corner to corner, searching for someone, anyone, that could have been in the house with him. But there was no one. Just the canes, standing there, silent. Hours passed as Solomon sat in a corner of the room, trying to make sense of everything. His exhaustion finally caught up with him, and despite his fear, his eyes grew heavy with sleep. "I just need to rest," he muttered to himself. "Maybe everything will make sense in the morning." He lay back down on his bed, still staring at the canes, his heart heavy with fear and confusion. Sleep came quickly this time, pulling him into a deep, dreamless slumber. The next morning, Solomon awoke to the sound of voices outside his house. They were frantic, filled with urgency. His heart skipped a beat as he sat up, his mind instantly recalling the strange events from the previous night. As he got out of bed and stepped outside, he saw a group of villagers gathered near the entrance to the market. They were all talking at once, their voices blending into a confusing cacophony of panic and disbelief. "What's happening?" Solomon asked one of his neighbors as he approached the crowd. The woman turned to him, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. "It's Chief Badmus," she said, her voice trembling. "He's gone mad." Solomon's heart raced. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "He woke up this morning screaming about spirits and canes," another man said, joining the conversation. "And there are strange marks all over his body, like he's been whipped." Solomon's breath caught in his throat. "Whipped?" "Yes," the man continued. "He's out of his mind. People are saying he's been cursed." Without another word, Solomon took off running toward Chief Badmus's compound. His mind raced with possibilities, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. Could it be true? Had the spirits of his mother and sister finally avenged their deaths? As he reached the compound, a large crowd had already gathered outside the gate. Murmurs and gasps of disbelief rippled through the air. As they watched Chief Badmus stumble around his courtyard, his once powerful and dignified figure now reduced to a pitiful, raving madman. Solomon pushed his way through the crowd, his eyes locking onto Chief Badmus. The chief's body was covered in welts and bruises, red and raw as though he had been whipped mercilessly. His clothes hung in tatters, and his eyes were wild, darting back and forth as though he was searching for something no one else could see. The moment Chief Badmus's gaze landed on Solomon, he froze. "You!" Chief Badmus screamed, pointing a trembling finger at him. His voice was hoarse and filled with terror. You brought them. You brought them here. Solomon stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what to say, didn't know what to feel. Was this real? Was this the vengeance he had asked for? Chief Badmus fell to his knees, his body shaking violently as he continued to scream. They came for me. Your mother, your sister, they came for me. I didn't know they would come. The crowd gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others whispering to each other in disbelief. Tears streamed down Chief Badmus's face as he began to confess, his voice breaking with every word. I killed them. I killed your family, he cried. I poisoned your father. I put a curse on your mother and your sister. I made sure they would die slowly, painfully. I wanted you to suffer like I had suffered. The crowd erupted in shock and outrage. Murmurs of disbelief and horror spread through the people as they listened to Chief Badmus's confession. Solomon's blood ran cold as he stood there, listening to the man who had destroyed his family. Anger surged through him, but there was also a strange sense of relief. Finally, the truth was out. Finally, everyone knew what kind of monster Chief Badmus really was. But as Chief Badmus continued to confess, something strange happened. His body began to convulse, his eyes rolling back into his head as he clutched at his chest. No, no, he screamed, his voice hoarse and frantic. They are here again. They are here. Before anyone could react, Chief Badmus collapsed to the ground, his body shaking violently for a few seconds before going still. His eyes remained wide open, staring blankly at the sky. Thank you for watching. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and to turn on your notification for the next episode.